The nervous system is responsible for many important tasks within the body, ranging from the control of our vital functions to informing how we interact with our environment. In this set of modules, we will introduce you to the autonomic and somatic nervous systems by first exploring their organization and then in subsequent modules investigating the general principles of the autonomic nervous system, neurotransmission, and the receptors involved. The nervous system is divided into the central nervous system, which consists of the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which allows interactions between the brain and other areas of the body. The efferent division of the peripheral nervous system is further divided into the somatic nervous system, which allows us to control our skeletal muscle, and the autonomic nervous system, or ANS, which controls the involuntary functions of our internal organs, such as the activities of smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, and glands. The autonomic nervous system has three branches: the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, and the enteric nervous system. In this module, we'll focus on the autonomic and somatic nervous systems. The sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems have opposite effects and are highly involved in the involuntary control of our body's homeostasis. Homeostasis is what allows the human body to maintain relatively stable internal conditions in ever-changing external circumstances. The ANS balances both our sympathetic activities, commonly referred to as fight or flight responses, and our parasympathetic activities, or rest and digest. For example, imagine you are going for an important interview for an opportunity you have worked very hard towards. As you sit in the waiting room, you may notice your heart starts to race and you begin to sweat. This is what happens when your sympathetic tone increases. In contrast, you may feel tired and sleepy after a big dinner because your parasympathetic system is activated. Each system controls unique functions and can be used to respond to the situation at hand. Let's refresh our knowledge on neurons. Neurons are the main cells of the nervous system. They communicate using neurotransmitters, which are chemicals released by one neuronal cell and taken up by adjoining neuronal cells or effector cells at a synapse. Adjoining cells receive the signal when the neurotransmitters bind to the receptors on their surface membrane. The ANS is made up of a relay of two neurons which synapse at the ganglia. A ganglia is formed by a group of neuron cell bodies. The parasympathetic nervous system has long preganglionic neurons and short postganglionic neurons. Parasympathetic preganglionic neurons release the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, or ACH, which activates nicotinic receptors on the cell bodies of postganglionic neurons. Parasympathetic postganglionic neurons also release the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, which activates muscarinic receptors on effector organs such as cardiac and smooth muscle cells, gland cells, and nerve terminals. Neurons that release acetylcholine are called cholinergic neurons. In contrast, sympathetic preganglionic neurons are shorter compared to their postganglionic neurons. Sympathetic ganglia lie next to the spinal cord. They are also called the paravertebral chain of ganglia. Like parasympathetic preganglionic neurons, sympathetic preganglionic neurons release acetylcholine, which activates nicotinic receptors on the cell bodies of postganglionic neurons. Sympathetic postganglionic neurons mainly release the neurotransmitter noradrenaline, which activates alpha and beta adrenergic receptors at effector organs, such as on cardiac and smooth muscle cells, gland cells, and nerve terminals. Sympathetic postganglionic neurons can also release acetylcholine, stimulating muscarinic receptors on sweat glands. The adrenal medulla is a modified sympathetic ganglion as it receives sympathetic preganglionic neuronal innervation and contains nicotinic receptors. The adrenal medulla releases adrenaline and noradrenaline into the blood at a ratio of about 4:1. They are also called circulating catecholamines or catecholamine hormones, which are different from neurotransmitters, as neurotransmitters travel through the synapse. The somatic nervous system, which controls our skeletal muscle activity, is a single neuron system. It is called the voluntary nervous system as it is associated with the voluntary control of our body's movement via skeletal muscles. The somatic nervous system belongs to the cholinergic system. The neurotransmitter acetylcholine is released at the neuromuscular junction, which is where a somatic nerve meets a skeletal muscle fiber. The neuromuscular junction contains the muscle type of nicotinic receptors. The key differences between the ANS and the somatic nervous system are neuron connectivity and the involuntary versus voluntary control of body functions, that is, unconscious actions versus conscious actions. In summary, the ANS consists of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems which exert opposite effects. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for fight or flight responses, while the parasympathetic nervous system dominates during rest and digest. Both the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems are made up of a relay of two neurons with key differences in the structural organization and the neurotransmitters and receptors involved. Under normal conditions, both systems exert continuous physiological control of organs to maintain our body's homeostasis. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter for all preganglionic neurons and for the parasympathetic postganglionic neurons. The receptors that interact with acetylcholine are muscarinic and nicotinic receptors. Noradrenaline is the neurotransmitter for most sympathetic postganglionic neurons and stimulates alpha and beta adrenergic receptors on effector organs. The somatic nervous system is responsible for our conscious perception of the environment and for voluntary control of body movements via skeletal muscles. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter released from somatic nerves at neuromuscular junctions. Upon release, acetylcholine stimulates nicotinic receptors to induce skeletal muscle contractions. Let's now revise the differences between the branches of the autonomic nervous system. See if you can fill in this table about the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems.